If I'm a venture capitalist betting on who's going to come out the other side of this AI revolution on top, it's probably not going to be Marriott or Hilton. All you have to do is look back to recent history, see what happened with the OTAs. I mean, the brands that they're head in the sand, and they've been playing catch up since then. So yeah, the AI thing is really interesting. Who knows where it's going, but it's going to be fascinating to see how it changes the independent hotel landscape. I think it's going to be revolutionary. I think you're not going to go to Bonvoy anymore or Hilton Honors. You're going to jump on to ChatGPT and let it help navigate the travel decision-making process.
So we're going to get into what you're doing now, but I wanted to start with a little bit about what you were doing before. And when we were catching up, you had told me that you were part of the Moxie launch, and we just opened a Moxie about a year ago.
Sure.
And you did 4 or 5 of them, maybe even more. So I'm curious to know about that whole story, and maybe you can kind of give us some of the highlights about what that was and how you got into that position.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I'll start, Jake, from the beginning. So I grew up in northern Michigan, basically a part of northern Michigan called Upper Peninsula, which most people haven't heard of. If you look on a map, it feels like it should be part of Canada. It's really cold. It's also a beautiful outdoor paradise. And I just mentioned that because that's, my love for the outdoors and my affinity for the outdoors started from a pretty young age. If you're growing up in the Upper Peninsula and you're not skiing and hiking and biking, and you're probably just sitting around the house watching TV. So, I grew up in Michigan, went to Michigan State. Ironically, I did go to the hotel school, which I studied liberal arts. I am very involved at the hotel school as alumni now. So it's a great school. I'm on an advisory board. I teach some classes there from time to time, but ultimately went through school, had a liberal arts degree, thought I wanted to be a lawyer, and then really kind of midstream decided I didn't want to be a lawyer. Didn't know what I wanted to do. So I got out of school and really leveraged my only marketable skill that I had, which was bartending. So I took a job at Club Med in Cancun and spent about a year there. And that was my first taste of the resort business. Started as a bartender, worked my way up into a management position. And really, I was intrigued by the business, but I wasn't ready to jump in head first. So moved back to Chicago, couch surfed for 6 months with friends, landed with a job with Accenture. So spent 4 years in management consulting. Spent a couple years in Melbourne, Australia, a couple years in Chicago. After 4 years, realized, consulting wasn't really what I wanted to do. It was very, left brain, very analytical, which I liked, but I didn't really have a lot of opportunity to flex, my creative muscle. So I decided, like most career changers, I'd go back and get an MBA. So I got into 2 schools. I got into Booth, the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. I got into another school called London Business School, which a lot of people don't know about, but it's kind of like the Wharton or Booth of Europe. It's a really amazing school. And, I really wanted to do something more entrepreneurial, and I wanted to learn finance. So that was the big reason why I went back to school. So, I was weighing my options, and I said, just thought, what a great experience to go live in London. So, paid my deposit, accepted my spot. And probably about 6 months before I left, I got approached by a group of friends. And this is the early aughts, early 2000s. And I had a lot of friends who were options traders, futures traders. Chicago was the kind of epicenter of derivatives trading. And it was a way, back in the heyday, you could be 26, 27 years old and making a ton of money. And so I got approached by a group of friends, and they said, listen, we pulled some money together. We want to open a nightclub, and we want you to kind of put the deal together and run with it. And, I didn't have any grand ambition to become a nightclub impresario or, be in the nightclub business. But I thought, God, what a great experience it could be. Step back, create a business. Sounds creative. It sounds, scrappy and entrepreneurial. So I decided to shift gears. I went back to the University of Chicago, studied while we kind of opened this nightclub. So we went out, we had some money pulled together. We put out a PPM, we raised capital, we found a space, created a brand, built a team, basically did everything a real estate developer does. And, it was very successful. It was really exhilarating. It was a great experience. So when I was wrapping up with school and we were kind of 3 years into the project, and obviously nightclubs don't have a real long, you know, life. Yeah, I thought, what's next? And I was talking to one of my mentors, and he said, "Listen, what you've done is basically real estate development." And so the light bulb went off, and I really liked hospitality. I liked the fact there's an operating business on top of it. So hotels were post business school kind of the next step for me. So started interviewing, with some Wall Street firms and their lodging groups. I mean, I talked to Starwood and Hilton and some of the C Corps about joining their development team. And really, I got approached by a colleague friend of mine who I went to business school with, real kind of entrepreneurial guy, had started a couple of businesses before business school. And, he said, "Listen, I've tied up this site in the North Shore of Chicago. I want to do a hotel. I need someone to help me figure it out." So I took the entrepreneurial leap. I joined, this kind of startup firm, 2007. We developed a couple hotels. We developed a couple restaurants, kind of really cool James Beard kind of restaurants. And that was going great. And then, obviously the GFC hit, and that put a fork in for, scrappy, undercapitalized developers. It wasn't a great time to be developing. So 2010, 2011, after a couple of years of feeling like you're running into a brick wall every day for, bankers aren't returning your calls, no deals are getting done, everyone's sitting on the sidelines. I got approached by one of our investors in the business. It's a group out of Minneapolis, Graves Hospitality. And, they were as kind of a family office type structure. They're very prolific developers. They developed the American brand, which, they grew that to 70, 80 units, sold it. They had pivoted into lifestyle hotels. And they were in a process of kind of, the platform was kind of transitioning from the father to the son. And, they had typically used their own balance sheet, back of the cocktail napkin underwriting. They were very successful, but they brought me on board to head up acquisitions and really try to institutionalize the firm a little bit, help bring in private equity type investors, larger family offices, build out a model, do all the things you need to do to kind of get your foot into the door of the institutional real estate world. So we did 4 Moxies, to your point, one in the Bay Area, one in Portland, 2 in Minneapolis. We did some other cool projects. If you ever fly into Minneapolis Airport, there's an Intercontinental connected to the terminal. We developed that. So spent almost 6 years there. Had a great experience, had a great time. But in 2019, Waterton reached out, and we're looking for someone to head up the platform and really take it in a new direction. So it was just an opportunity. I wanted to get back to Chicago. And it was just a great opportunity to be able to launch a business underneath an established kind of institutional real estate platform. So to your point on Moxie, we developed 4 of the first 8. Lightstone did a few more. Vision did one of the properties. But it was a really great experience to see how Marriott created a brand. And I think they did a really good job with it. I think they were very selective in the beginning with the markets they went into, very selective with operators they allowed to operate, very selective, with, the developers they partnered with. And it's a great, you own a Moxie, it's a great business model. I mean, it's, you don't need a lot of FTEs, crazy margins. You focus on rooms and beverage, which are the 2 things that, make a hotel money. So that was a great experience, and really got to see kind of firsthand how a big, behemoth like Marriott goes about creating a brand.
What did you learn from the nightclub business?
How to manage a P&L, how to manage a lot of personalities, how to put a team together. One thing we did that I still try to practice today is we brought in people from outside the industry, which I think was a good move. Just brings a fresh perspective. So it was a great experience. I mean, it was, I was out raising capital, putting it was the first deal I put together, really. So, I mean, stuff I did there, I still practice every day in my current role.
Are there things that translate to the type of hotels you're building and investing in now from the early Moxie and nightclub days?
Yeah. In lifestyle hotels, it's a lot about the environment and the vibe, right? So it's lighting, it's music, temperature, it's all those things that are more art than science. And it's still something we're always struggling with because it is more art than science. But really how to place, make, and set a scene was a huge takeaway for sure. And then obviously food and beverage is a big part of the lifestyle hotel business. So, it was great to really be in the ground floor and really rolling up my sleeves and learn the food and beverage business because that's a key part of what we do today.
One thing I've been noticing a lot recently is how important location is, particularly in hotels. I mean, everyone knows location, location, location for real estate, but I've seen it now, I think, very profoundly in the past 5 years. And I'm curious, in those early days when you were poking around with upstart shops and different entrepreneurs, if there was things that you learned about location that's informing the decisions that you're making today when you're identifying new spots, new opportunities for the new brand.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, location, location, location is super important. So when we look at a property for outbound, first of all, I'm a big believer in checklists. So we've got this whole checklist we built with 30 questions and we rank each location on these different metrics that we think are important. And there are, location's a big piece of it, right? So number one, we have a pretty rigorous kind of thought process that goes into identifying what's a good location. High level, we like to be in markets that are 60% occupancy or higher, which, for an urban hotel, that sounds a little bit on the lower side. But for these seasonal markets where you have shoulder season, if you're running 60% occupancy, you're cranking, in the busy season. And in the busy season, summer, winter, there's a ton of compression. That's really where you create value through kind of yield management. So, we look for location. We look for what we call tier one locations, which are 60% occupancy or higher. We also want at least 2 seasons of demand. So we don't want to have a property where, you're busy for 5 months in the summer, then you shut it down and reopen it next year. That's a tough business model. It's like opening a new hotel
Yep.
every year. And as you know, it's a real pain in the ass to open a new hotel. So yeah, we focus a lot of location. We focus on metrics, but also, when we look at a deal, we kind of ask the real high level. Obviously, we underwrite and beat things up left and right and do sensitivity analysis, but we ask kind of four kind of major questions. Number one is this a place I'd like to visit? Sounds simple, but my view is if I don't like to go there, other people won't like to go there. Are we working with people we like to be around? We've kind of like a no assholes rule. And I think that's very important. And then the other two questions we ask are something I gleaned from Jim Graves when I was at Graves Hospitality, but a project should capture demand, not create it. So we don't want to be pioneers and go into a market where we don't want to be the next Orlando or Vegas, right? Be the first person in. So property's got to capture demand, not create it, but it has to create energy for the team, not capture it. So those are the four kind of philosophical questions we ask every time we look at a new deal.
The last one's interesting because, there are like one of the highest ADR properties in the country, one of the Amans in Utah, there was nothing there. And they're like bringing all this demand. And I've been focusing a lot on leisure, but I'm curious as to like how you struggle with that when you're going into these markets where like clearly people are going to a national park or they want to be outdoors, but where it could be that you're bringing in a completely new customer and the customer you're sourcing, maybe they're kind of there, but maybe they're not kind of there, or because the brand you're creating, now they're going to come there. How do you think about that?
Yeah, well, that's not for us creating demand. I'm not saying it's not a business model, it doesn't work. So that's just kind of a philosophical philosophy. But we listen, people are coming to an outbound because they want to get out into nature. So while we're in towns, we're in Jackson Hole, we're in Sedona, we're usually on the edge of town. And we usually have bigger sites. So for instance, going through our 5 deals, Jackson Hole's on 13 acres, Stowe, Vermont's on 10 acres. Our property in Yosemite's 20 plus acres. Mammoth is on 8 acres. So we do look for big sites that we can program and create a kind of outdoor environment. So I'm not saying we're like smack dab in the middle of town, but we're always on the periphery. We like to be within driving distance of good coffee and some retail and things like that. But we don't. But it's kind of a line we toe is how do we kind of create the outdoor environment, but kind of do it where it's adjacent to a town. So the town actually becomes an amenity for the guests. And another thing is these towns, especially the towns that we're in, they've got really great cultures and really cool culture. Like Jackson Hole's got a great music scene and great restaurants. And, Stowe, Vermont, it looks like a Hallmark Hall of Fame, movie set, so we really try to get into the communities, become a fabric community, really become the living room for the community and bring the community in. So that's part of the reason why we like to be near a population center.
Can you take us back to kind of that initial moment when you were thinking through the business plan of Outbound and what it was and just that whole curative process to get it from idea to reality at the very beginning?
Yeah. So the idea for Outbound actually came about in 2018. A friend of mine who's actually a partner in our business was at the Grand Canyon, and going back to the Moxie reference, he texted me and said, you got to open up a Moxie here. I mean, I'm at the Grand Canyon. It's crawling with people. There's no good restaurants. There's no cool hotels. Like a Moxie would crush it here. And so a light bulb went off. And then my first thought was, well, Moxie's a pretty urban brand, but could you take the ethos of Moxie or the business model of Moxie and go to these markets? Really, light bulb went off because number one, it was a fragmented market. There wasn't anyone playing in the space at that point. And there was other adjacent kind of concepts you could point to, like AJ with Graduate, like going in and creating a brand and creating a niche product in certain markets. So there was somewhat of a playbook out there, but the idea kind of piqued my curiosity. So I started really just looking at deals in these markets and underwriting deals, chasing a couple of deals so I could kind of figure out if this was a place that I wanted to spend the next 10, 15 years of my career. And, what I found was, number one, real estate always comes back to supply and demand, right? I mean, we try to overcomplicate the business, but supply and demand is really, it's tough to fight the laws of supply and demand. And, the demand in these markets is really robust. It's largely leisure transient. There's a decent amount of group, but it's leisure business, right? And leisure business historically has held up better than, business travel. And that's obvious, right? I mean, the first thing a company does when we hit a recession is they, dial back the travel budgets, right? But, you and I are still going on vacation if we have a job in a recession, right? So we really like the demand side of the picture. And then the supply side was really interesting to me. When we did a Moxie in Portland, Portland it was 2017. It was like a top 10 market. And it was a ground up deal. So it took us about 18 months to entitle the land. It took another 18 months to build it. And that 3 years, the pipeline in Portland swelled like 40%. Yeah, I'm sure it was nuts. And it's like, there's got to be a better place to develop hotels where there's some real barriers to entry. And these markets have real barriers to entry. There's kind of a lack of private land. I mean, Jackson Hole's surrounded by national land, and there's only 3% of the county is privately held. There's a real threat of NIMBYism in these markets. People are very averse to development. So while that can be a challenge, once you're up and running and operating property, it's a real barrier to entry. So really like the supply demand story. And then icing on the cake was, the fragmentation of the markets and the fact that these markets aren't, a lot of times you're buying assets from non-institutional type of operators. And, for instance, when we bought our property in Jackson Hole, they didn't revenue manage. They had their summer rate and their winter rate. And that just blew my mind. I'm like, holy cow. So, just being able to step in and operate a hotel with an institutional mindset, with institutional processes, create some value right out of the gate.
The unique thing about you and your firm is a lot of groups either have the science side or they have the art side, but they don't have both. And you have both. And all those things that you just described were on a lot of the business fundamentals. I'm curious, what was the kind of discussions around the vibe and the hard to describe things, the arty stuff that you were going to try and create and build?
Yeah. So I think, when we look at building a hotel, before we even get into the design side of things, we get a branding agency on board, right? And we try to figure out kind of what is the ethos of the hotel, get in the logo and that kind of granularity, but kind of who's the customer, what's the ethos, how's the positioning going to be, really think through those things. And you bring on a creative team to really bring the vision to life. First couple deals, we worked with various design firms, worked with a guy in Jackson, Matt Goodrich, who used to run Aberco. So really liked the kind of guys who spun off from larger firms. It's more economical. And I think they have less, they can be a little more creative, a little more freedom. So hired him for our first project. He was great to work with. But as we started rolling it out, we knew we needed to put together brand standards. We needed to kind of tighten things up, right? Otherwise, reinventing the wheel every time, number one, is tough. Number two, if you're going to create a brand, there's got to be some common threads that go through it. So what we did was we decided, listen, Ace Hotels, AJ, all these people that do lifestyle hotels, a lot of the companies that really lean into lifestyle have in-house creative studios. We did not want to build an in-house creative studio because that's a big endeavor. And frankly, there's a lot of creative, good people out there that you can work with. So we actually brought in Getty's group. Roger Hill's a friend and a mentor, and he's been very involved in Waterton for many years in the advisory board. So I sat down with Roger and Ron, who runs the company now, and said, hey, really want to kind of not recreate the wheel every time, want to build out a creative studio, branding, design. Why don't you make a strategic investment in the brand and we'll build out a creative studio, focus on outbound, kind of underneath the Getty's umbrella. And Getty's has obviously been around forever. They're a world-class firm, offices all over the world. And that idea really resonated. So, we brought the team in. So Getty's is a partner now, and they do all our design and branding work. They also do our procurement, which is, another thing, that really is a big help, right? Especially now with tariffs and everything going on, having someone help you navigate procurement. So we brought them in, we created brand standards, and they're very loose. It's more akin to a soft brand, right? I mean, it's not like, red carpet and Jackson Hole, same pattern, but blue carpet and Mammoth. Like there's some flexibility within the standards, but we needed to kind of create some guardrails. So that's what we did. We brought in Getty's, and then on the brand side, we brought in a CMO, a woman named Bridget Russo. She was the chief marketing officer for Shinola, the watch company. She launched Shinola, and she's super creative and she knows how to navigate that world. So she's a key player in the kind of creativity side of things. But it was funny because I know you're buddies with Bashar, but when I was thinking about hiring a brand person, I was having dinner with Bashar, and he's like, don't hire hotel people. They're all stupid. It's like, hire someone from retail. And so thanks, Bashar. I took that to heart, and we brought on Bridget, but she's been great, but she's super, super creative and knows how to navigate that world and has a lot of relationships. So she's a key piece of that puzzle.
I always have like takeaways when I speak to people on the show. And Bashar was, I think, the first guest actually. And one of the things I remembered from his conversation is he recommended, instead of hiring a designer and like coming up with a design for your hotel, he said, first you have to hire the branding person. And he didn't call him the chief marketing officer, but you have to have a vision. You have to have a brand for what you want to do and what this is. And then you have basically a Bible or a document that you can give to all the people involved in the project. And you can say, this is what we're doing. So then they immediately know, they immediately get it. And it seems like you did the same thing. Was it important to create a brand where all the hotels are going to be that brand versus like a collection where each hotel has a different name, but Waterton owns them all and there's a similar ethos, but they're not under the same brand? Like, did you think about doing one or the other, or was it always a brand?
Yeah, really, really interesting question. And yeah, we started out thinking it'd be more of a soft brand. The first property we bought in Jackson was called the Virginian Lodge. There was a ton of brand equity in that asset, even though it was run down and none of the locals had been there other than Wednesday night karaoke
Nostalgia.
night. Yeah, it's nostalgia. And they've got this amazing site out front from the 50s, neon sign. And
I hope it's in your office now, or you kept it there.
So yeah, we said, listen, it should be a soft brand, the Virginian. We'll keep it the Virginian Lodge. But then we started looking at other deals that didn't really have brand equity. And going back, the same dinner actually I had with Bashar, he said, listen, you need a hard brand. Look at Kempton. They kind of were a little loosier, goosier, with the branding, and they really started to dial it in. You're going to create more enterprise value at the brand level by going hard branded. So our MO now, we kind of shifted. Our MO now is go hard brand, although there are some assets we look at, like the Virginian, where it would be, we'd probably keep the name. And so like the Virginia is the Virginian Lodge by Outbound Hotels. And so we would do that for certain assets if there was some brand equity there and there was some value in it. But the MO and the plan A is hard branded. So Outbound Sedona, Outbound Stowe, Outbound Yosemite, et cetera, et cetera.
We're buying a hotel now that's like, I guess, you'd think it as a 5-star hotel. We have kind of 5-star rates. And there are other hotels in this market that are almost like an Airbnb. It's like there's no services. It's very, very entrepreneurial style. Like I think it's too much that way for my taste. And we've checked a couple of them out. Where have you found to land on the service side? And is it the same experience and service level at all the properties, or do you have to kind of navigate the different properties and adjust and tailor and tune to what that location needs?
Yeah. So when we started out, seeing that Moxie was kind of the example we pointed to from an amenities and service standpoint, I think we skewed a little more kind of select service, heavily select service. We still had some food and beverage. But one lesson we've learned and one pivot we've made is we really have leaned in a little bit more to full service. So we have food and beverage, we do catering now and group business. We don't do room service. We don't have the bellman. It's not like full on like 5-star type service because it's just really tough to execute in these markets on that level of service. Just there's not a very deep labor pool and can get expensive. You have to pay people a lot in these markets. But one of the big lessons learned was because we're independent, you need group business a midweek and in a shoulder season to make up for lack of distribution system. And so we've really leaned into it, and catering's a great business. And what has really surprised us is the amount of group business in these markets. It's all Smurf, it's all kind of social for the most part. You do some corporate retreats and that type of business. Was a lot of weddings, a lot of family reunions, anniversaries, birthdays, that type of business. But there's a lot of it out there, and it really leaning into it as we've seen a lot of success at our properties.
A buddy of mine, John Grossman, has this place called High Country Motor Lodge. I don't know if you checked it out, but it's similar to what you're doing. And he has this thing, it's like a Nordic spa there. What are you doing in terms of experiences, amenities beyond the hotel rooms?
Yeah, so depending on the property and the footprint, we're really focused on it varies, but we really focus on pools are a big focal point of our properties. Heated pools, year-round pools. Some of the pools that barrel saunas buy-in, so you get a little bit of that wellness kind of option for guests. But we also spend a lot of time really thinking about our public outdoor spaces. So as I mentioned, our projects have a lot of acreage, right? So one of the reasons we like a lot of acreage, it gives you some optionality down the road to develop it or sell it or whatnot. It also allows you to create a gathering space, fire pits. You can program around it. The food and beverage can spill out onto it. I tell my team, Ian Schrager had his hotel lobbies. We have our fire pits. That's kind of like, we look at the outdoor spaces as our kind of lobby, as our kind of focal point. So we spend a lot of time on that. It's interesting you brought up the Nordic spa. We are in talks with a group out of Canada to develop a Nordic spa next to our project in Yosemite, California. And it's a crazy business. I started lifting up the hood and looking into it, but it's a really attractive business. But it's a business we're not going to get into, right? So we are looking to partner with them. We're going to sell some of our adjacent acres to them, and they're going going through entitlements. And California is tricky, as you know. But yeah, we're actually looking to do a Nordic spa adjacent to that concept. So it's really, we focus on the outdoor areas, we focus on the pools and the pool experience. And then where we can, we like to partner with really good groups who bring something else to the table and, kind of let them do what they do and run with it.
When you're partnering with those groups, there's like a million different ways you could structure it and think about it. And you obviously have to make sure the group is ultimately going to be a good partner and the right fit. Can you talk through your process, what you've seen work and what doesn't work in those types of situations? Like, you're intrigued by the Nordic spa business, but you don't want to get into it. So you're happy to let them do it. But like, do you profit off of that? Or is it just a nice amenity now that you can have next door to your hotel?
Yeah, I think that what's most important is making sure you're getting into business with the right people. So going back to our philosophy, like, we only do business with people we like to be around. So number one, let's make sure they're people we want to be in business with. Number two, let's make sure they're balance sheet and track record and capitalize. And then I think other than that, the structure becomes almost secondary, whether it's I've seen ground leases, in the case of the Nordic spa, we're going to just sell them some of our excess land. But we had a comfort level that they can execute, and we're not going to have a half-built spa next to us in 5 years, right? So I think really, it comes back to the people, and make sure you're getting into business with the right folks, and then the structure and everything can fall into line. But we look at it more. Listen, it could be an ancillary revenue stream, but what's more important to us is does 1 + 1 = 3, right? So with this Nordic spa specifically, they think their busy season is going to be December through March, which is our slow season. So it can help smooth out some of the seasonal patterns of our business. Also, we can sell more group business because you can have a group come in, you can sell them half a day in a spa package, and and then they could do an event at the hotel. So we look at it first and foremost, is it gonna help our P&L and our overall guest experience and our brand experience.
You created this business plan where there's a lot of barriers to entry, but there's also barriers to entry for you. Like physically, you don't live in these Mountain West towns, but even if you did, you'd live in one and you'd have to still travel to the others, and they're all hard to get to. What's been your process to, like, maybe you can walk us through kind of your deal pipeline process and how you visit deals, and like, how you commit to something when you're going to have to travel maybe a whole day to get there, and how do these deals find you? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, it's definitely difficult to get some of these places, which is a drawback of the business model. But once you get there, they're amazing places, right? So I think, if we go out and we, for instance, we're going to head out to the Moab area, we're looking at a project in a couple of weeks. It's like, well, spend all the time getting out here. Like, let's work for a day and a half. Let's get around town. Let's kick the tires. Let's see the comp set. Let's tour the property, but also let's like carve out half a day to have fun and mountain bike or go hiking or something. So that makes it palatable. Listen, I have 2 teenage kids at home. It's tough to travel, and it
Yep.
typically adds sometimes half a day onto a trip just getting there. And I've gotten very used to being on puddle jumpers and going to these tiny little airports. Like Bishop Airport, which is what you fly into to go to Mammoth. I mean, literally, their baggage claim is they pull a truck out and just throw your bags on this table, and you just grab them off this table. So it's interesting. But yeah, it is, it can be difficult to get to some of these places. So you got to really love what you're doing. You got to love going to these locations. But also one of the most fun, rewarding parts of the job is when you're looking at a new project or you're renovating a project, is really immersing yourself in the town. We spend a lot of time, the team spends a lot of time in a town when we've got a project going on. We're renovating our property in Sedona right now. And, we spend a lot of time getting to know the locals, getting to know the local restaurateurs, business folks, CVB. It's really fun to get kind of immersed in these local communities. And they're all like towns with 10,000 people. So it doesn't take long, but that's a really fun part of the job that I enjoy.
How does the deal flow work? Do you guys mostly cold call people, or deals coming to you through brokers? What does that situation look like?
It's a little mix of both. One nice thing about having a pretty tightly defined strategy is, you get blasted. I'm sure you do too, with 50 deals a day from the brokerages. You can hit delete on 99% of it, right?
Yeah, 40,
So
all 49. Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So we prefer off-market deals, obviously, but flip side is when you're chasing an off-market deal, how motivated is the seller? If they're really motivated, they would probably list it. So out of our existing 5 properties, I think 3 were off market, and 3 were off market, 2 were marketed. One, the Jackson deal, is lightly marketed with kind of a local broker. But so what we've done is we've identified about 52 target markets in the US, and we've been to most of them, and we have a database. We use this program called Airtable, and
Oh, wow.
we have basically a data on every single market, but not only every single market, but we know which assets in the market that would fit, check our boxes, right? And sometimes only 1 or 2 or assets, right? So we're constantly, my acquisitions team spends a lot of time on the phone. Just, we talk to these owners of properties, and a lot of them, we bug them once a quarter, and, most of the time they're polite and say no thanks. But once in a while, something shakes free. For instance, our property in Mammoth, it was owned by a high net worth venture capitalist. He lived in LA, Beverly Hills. He owned the hotel. It was kind of It's a hobby for him, kind of vanity project. And, our team was out in Mammoth because that was a kind of high conviction market for us. We knew this was an asset that checked our boxes. So we called him for 18 months. And finally, one day we called him. We said, you know what? I'm ready to sell. My daughter's just graduated high school. I have no reason to come back up to Mammoth. And so, that was just, an example of persistence and some grit. And, that deal kind of shook loose. But it's a mix, Jake, of marketed and non-marketed.
Are there anything that's like that you've seen that just becomes a hard no for you that you're completely passing on, that your team maybe presents to you guys? I don't know if it's through a committee or whatever, but it's just like no because of some thing that you've learned or some sort of attribute about the deal?
Yeah, we look at a lot of deals. And so, the typical process is, me and my team will beat up a deal. If we really like it, then we have a whole investment committee process we have to go through on the Waterton side, and similar to what they do on the multifamily side, same investment committee. And, they'll kick it around, they'll beat it up every which way but Sunday. But by the time we take it to the Waterton investment committee, typically it's been pretty vetted. We've previewed it. We know there's going to be a good reception to it. But listen, if we look at 100 deals a year, maybe 6 of them kind of check the boxes. It's just, it's a game of numbers. You have to look at as much as you can. And typically, the big reasonable pass on deals is the basis, right? But also maybe the market's a little too seasonal. Maybe, we're not convinced the demand generator is that robust. Maybe it's just one demand generator and would like a little more diversity of demand generators within the market. Yeah, there's a whole host of reasons why we pass on deals, but usually it comes to bid-ask spread between the buyer and seller.
One of the things I learned from John Grossman is he has this saying that's like, don't fight the building. And it's tough when you're doing renovation, particularly when you have a vision and you want to hold true to your brand. What's been the process as you're renovating these to get what you want, but to also not blow your basis? Because a lot of these deals, I think with your competitors or other similar brands, have gone off the rails when the basis just got crazy. The idea was great, but the basis was crazy.
Yeah. Well, you gotta, your buddy's smart because, you can't fight the bones of the building, right? So we actually like quirky projects, right? Whether it's exterior corridor, not all our, a couple of our projects are exterior corridor, not all of them. Things like exterior corridor, just funky bones or quirky layouts. Like we embrace it. We think it's kind of unique and fun. But, listen, it's really difficult to renovate or build properties in these markets. One of the advantages of being a part of Waterton is I can leverage the development capital team here. They, renovate over $100 million a year to some crazy number. So there's a lot of really smart people on the capital side. There's a lot of relationships on the capital side, a lot of scars on the capital side. So I think that's one differentiator with us versus some of the other platforms is we have a really seasoned team we can tap into. And then, what we've discovered is on the development side is you got to stay away, for the most part, there's exceptions, stay away from the local contractors. In these towns, a lot of them are home builders, don't know hotels. It's kind of an island manana mindset with everyone. So what we typically our MO to do is we have a network of contractors all over the country that Waterton works with. So we'll typically fly in a contractor that makes sense. The beauty of being in a hotel is you can house them while they're doing the renovation. And we just let them loose once we have CDs. And that's worked pretty well for us. For instance, we're going through renovation right now in Sedona, and our contractor's out of Scottsdale, and we've been working with him for 15 years. So, we know he does good work. We can trust him. And he just sends in, an army of people and they start hammering nails. But it can get really tricky. We also, typical urban hotel deal, maybe you're carrying 5% contingency or something like that. We carry 10 to 15%.
Wow.
Especially with these older buildings, because you never know what you're going to find when you start ripping walls apart. But so we're pretty conservative on that side of things.
You have a mix of institutional partners and maybe some high net worth and family office in these deals. What's you had a really novel concept. It wasn't like, hey, we're going to buy a Hilton in a secondary city or a primary city. What were some of the challenges to explain the business plan, explain the concept to people that are fiduciaries on behalf of like big capital allocators?
Yeah. So to your point, I think early days, the first few projects, we were skewed much more heavily towards the high net worth family office bucket. I mean, we raised 9 figures of high net worth capital, which is a lot. When you're doing it $1 million, $2 million at a time. Our project in Sedona, we're partnered with Bearings. I know Stu Turner, great group. Our Yosemite deal, we're partnered with. We have a 50-50 partnership with Argosy, and they're an opportunity fund. They have an OZ fund. This goes out of their OZ fund. So we are definitely, as we grow the platform, we're skewing more towards institutional type investors. It's just really hard to scale when you're trying to syndicate a deal. You have to tie it up for a while, and it's a lot of
Yep.
work on the front end. So that's the direction the business is going in. But as far as challenges, we tied up our property in Jackson Hole in March of 2020. We inked the PSA, and a week later, the world shut down with COVID. So, it was a big capital. It was, north of $30 million of equity we were trying to raise. So I was sitting around scratching my head, and I went to talk to David Schwartz, who's the founder of Waterton, and said, listen, I don't know. I mean, the world shut down. I don't even know if hotels will be around in 7 months. There's a lot of panic going on. And he said, listen, we're going to do this the old fashioned way. He lives in Jackson Hole for half the year. He said, get on a plane, come out to Jackson Hole. We'll sit down with my friends. We'll go to my country club, and we'll raise this
I love it.
$1 at a time. And so luckily, well, not luckily, but because of COVID, we were able to have like 7 months of diligence, because you couldn't even get like partners group there to do a PCA, or, people weren't jumping on planes. So we spent about 6 months. We raised the capital. It was a Herculean task, but, clearly the concept resonated. People saw the opportunity. Spent a lot of time on the front end thinking through what it was going to be, how we were going to put a team together. And our group of high net worth investors a lot of them are very seasoned, very, C-suite type, real estate folks. So we got a lot of good candid feedback. Not everyone invested, obviously, but we got good feedback all around and tweaked the pitch. But it got easier on the second project, and a lot of the folks that invest in the first one were happy, so they rolled it in the second one. And but that was just the equity. Then the debt was insane too. And typically, philosophically, we are very low leverage hotel investors. 50 to maybe we'll stretch to 55%. But even going out and trying to find a 50% LTC loan on a hotel with a heavy redevelopment component in the middle of COVID was not easy. In fact, what we ended up doing was First Republic had opened up an office across the street from our site, and they were kind of active in the market. The CEO at the time had a house in Jackson. So we just knocked on the door and said, we're doing a hotel here. Come look at it. And they ended up doing the deal with us because they liked the real estate. They liked the idea of it being across the street from their office. Obviously, they're not our lender anymore. But we had to get strappy in the beginning. We got a lot of no's, got a lot of doors slammed in our face, but just through persistence and just a belief in what we were doing, a belief in the real estate for that specific asset, really allowed us to get over the hurdle and get the deal across the finish line. And it's been a fantastic deal for us. The good part about starting a project in 2020 was, we caught the wave of outdoor, just through dumb luck. But who knew that like during COVID, outdoor hospitality would be the hottest sector along with extended stay. So when we did open, we were riding a wave for those first couple of years.
I love that you guys are this huge organization. You've done almost $10 billion of deals, and you can still scrap it together. Like that's the best. I mean, we just had to put a deal together kind of with like local people, mostly because we wanted to, but it's fun, like to go back to almost day one, day zero, how it was at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. But like I said, you can't scale a business that way. So, but listen, it's a fun business we're in, but it's a lot of work and it's tough. And if you don't love it, you're screwed.
It's hard. Well, then let's talk about the operation side because I think a lot of people fail to appreciate that hotel's real estate investment and operating business. You learned that from the nightclub side. And a lot of people that do what you do, I think, set up an operating company and they're vertically integrated. You chose not to do that. Talk us through the decision strategy and like why you came to that conclusion.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it can point to the historical hotel investment strategy for Waterton. So before I joined, when I joined in 2019, my mandate was to shift the strategy, change the strategy. Historically, we started investing in hotels in 2007, and the strategy was focused on Marriott, Hilton, flagged full service suburban properties. So lots of Westin, Sheraton's, DoubleTrees, those types of flags. And we actually had a management company along with it that, basically just managed our portfolio. I think at the height of the last, probably 2017, we had like 12 properties or something in the portfolio. And the original plan for Waterton was to be, so they're vertically integrated on the multifamily side. Plan was to be vertically integrated on the hotel side. Well, what we found is operating a hotel is very different than operating a multifamily building. Just sheer number of employees, systems, don't talk to each other, et cetera. So we made a conscious decision not to get in the management business. We sold that business off to Waterford Group out of New England, Len Woolman and his brother Mark. And we decided to stick to investment management and asset management and obviously the brand. And the big reason was, as you know, you have a management company. It's unless you get to a scale of 25, 30 properties, whatever that magic number is, the economics are tough because you have a lot of upfront costs. You have to invest in infrastructure. And the best way to get there is through third party management. It's going to take you a long time to develop 25 properties. So we just felt it was a different business than we wanted to be in. Not that building on listen, the management companies are great businesses if you get to scale. I mean, obviously look at some of the trades that have been going on, but we just felt, let's be nimble, let's be lean, let's focus on investment management and asset management. So then, we developed our first 5 properties. We had a couple different management companies working on the properties. And we just decided, listen, we want to be vertically integrated because no one watches a property like the owner does, but we don't want to build out a management company. So how do we potentially partner with someone to grow the platform and grow the operations side? And ultimately, we landed on a group called Coral Tree, used to be Destination Hotels, Low Family, Low Enterprises owns it. I know you're tight with the family. And so they are essentially going on a go-forward basis. They're managing our existing portfolio. They'll be our operator on a go-forward basis. And they're building out what we're calling the Outbound SWAT team. But essentially, they're building a dedicated team to focus on outbound, almost like a new co underneath the Coral Tree umbrella. And so for us, I think it's a win-win for them. They're going to get a pipeline of management deals out of it. They're investing alongside of us. So we've got alignment, skin in the game. But when we looked across the universe of management companies, they were the perfect fit. I mean, independent resort properties, that's what they've been doing since before I was born. So they understand, have a really good understanding of the market. They're really good at the group business side of things, which I touched on earlier, but I think it's really important to our business model. They were the ownership group behind Two Roads, which we point to as a great execution in the brand space. So they've got kind of that institutional knowledge. They've built something before and had the big exit to Hyatt. And then, like I've touched on a couple times during this conversation, they're good people. Tom Larson and Mike Everett, who run the company, they're friends. They're really good people. The Lowe family is obviously very well respected. Terranea is an incredible asset. So just the stars aligned. It just seemed to make sense. So we decided to kind of start a new co or have them start a new co underneath the Coral Tree umbrella. So we're super excited about that. And that's the path going forward. It's similar to with Getty's on the design and branding side of things. How can we be vertically integrated? How can we scale a platform? But how can we be scrappy while we do it? How can we not lay out a ton of capital or get distracted by building on an ancillary business? It's the same kind of mindset went into both partnerships. Because frankly, on the brand side, we don't need outside investors, we can do it off our balance sheet. So any investors that we bring in, they're for strategic reasons, and they're going to help us scale. But I think we've come to a spot now where we are more or less vertically integrated through partnerships with partners with real skin in the game, and that's been the philosophy.
As you're setting up these partnerships where ultimately like you're the boss, you're in control, how do you make sure there's no miscommunication or break on the alignment of interest? Meaning if Getty starts, you know, turning into a crappy designer or something like, and now they're into the brand, how do you think you would navigate that? And I guess it goes back to picking partners, but it's a great strategy. That's
Yeah,
running through
yeah,
my
no,
mind. I'm
no, and that's
curious
something
to know your
yeah,
thought process.
great question. It's something we've thought through. We we have a hand in creating the team. So these teams, right? So we can sit down with Roger and Ron and say, "Hey, we really think you should hire this designer, or we really like this designer in your team. We want him or her on the project." So it's a very collaborative process. And then as far as the SWAT team goes with Coral Tree, we'll have a hand in kind of the major hires, right? And then you just try to hire really good people and get out of the way and let them do their job.
How do you, on the management side, what are going to be the ways that you would judge whether they're doing a good job? What's going to be, top KPIs that are important to you?
Yeah, so we spend a lot of time in RevPAR Index. Probably the one thing we focus on the most. We obviously pay attention to guest service scores; those are important. But if you're taking care of the guest and the top line is there, the rest typically will fall into place.
Yep. Yep. Are you in the markets that you're in? They're mostly independent. What's been your experience on RPI when you have this, like, a lot of smart people, great branding, all this stuff? How has been the ramp up in these markets where maybe there's a couple brands, maybe there's some
Mhm.
independents? What's that been like?
Yeah, I would say one of the big learnings is these properties take longer to ramp than if you pop up a hotel in Portland in the Pearl District, right? Because people, you get a lot of repeat guests every year to these markets, right? Family every year goes to Jackson Hole, or they go skiing a few times a year in Mammoth, driving up from LA, and they fall into the properties that they just like, right? So a lot of it is, yeah, it takes a while to pull them away to try a new kind of experience. So, typically when we're underwriting deals, we have a lot of runway for working capital to get through those initial months. But yeah, it's definitely harder to ramp. There are not a lot of branded properties in these markets, although there are some. And I know some people in the space have recently signed deals with some of the C Corps. And our philosophy is number one, listen, Marriott and Hilton flags are amazing if you have a lot of business transient travel, right? You get the road warriors, they want to rack up their points. They want to rack up their points so they can go on vacation in Jackson Hole, right? So when you have these branded properties in these markets, you're playing the redemption game. A lot of redemption points. And it's just the brands aren't as powerful because the GSOs and all the things they have at the corporate level aren't feeding you business, right? It's way more important. Yeah, the biggest, I think, learning operationally we've had is it is absolutely critical to have best in class GMs and DOSs on these properties. I think in some markets you can paper over that a little bit. If you have a good brand, good management company, you can still perform. But these properties are remote. You're on an island. You have a person who's got 100, 150 employees. They're running a real business, and they have to be inspiring. They have to be able to navigate the seasonality. You have to deal with H-2B visas and J-1 visas during the busy seasons. There's a housing component. There's all kinds of complexities to running these specific assets. And if you don't have a rock star GM and a rock star DOS, it's going to be an uphill battle. So that's something we really, really focus on coming out of the gates. And if you think about it, if you have a manufacturing business or a retail business, whatever, pick the industry, and you have 150 employees, like your general manager, your CEO, you're going to spend a ton of time. You're going to talk to a ton of candidates. It's going to be a big deal. There's a mindset in the hotel business where people are like, oh, this GM looks pretty good. They've been in a couple decent properties. Let's bring them on. Like it kind of shocks me the lack of diligence a lot of times some management companies do when they bring on GMs. But we really spend a lot of time and work our network and make sure when we bring on a GM, they're up to the task because it's a tough gig.
What are some of the things you're doing differently on the marketing side? Bashar said, don't hire hotel people. They don't know anything. Hire a retail person. Well, you hired a retail person. What have you seen that she's doing that you're like, oh, that's cool. I haven't seen that before.
Yeah, so I think some of the people in the space that we compete against or adjacent to us, they really, really, really lean into the, nature and the magic of nature and, going hardcore outdoors and adventure travel. And listen, there's a thread of that to what we do, but we actually just launched this campaign called Outdoorsy. And it centers on the idea that, listen, outdoorsy for me might be different from some guy who's going to climb El Capitan versus, you know, my brother who wants to sit around the campfire and drink beer and eat s'mores, right? So like
Yeah.
outdoorsy can be a lot of things. So we've kind of leaned a little bit more into the culture of these locations, into the music, into the food, and a little less into the like hardcore, you know, outdoor activities. Because frankly, I mean, if you're a hardcore rock climber, you're sleeping in your van anyway on the side of the road. You're not staying at a hotel. So yeah, we've done a really cool campaign around the idea of what is outdoorsy, and that's one I think really interesting thing we've done. It's just interesting to hear how she thinks through the business. She came in not knowing anything about lodging, and now she obviously drank through a fire hose and does. But she's like, we do A, B, and C in retail. Why the hell are you doing it in hospitality? So we've tried to take some lessons learned from the retail business and apply them.
I actually think the outside influence that the brands have, and they're just these big behemoths, they slow a lot of innovation down on hospitality. So on the independent side, you can do things more entrepreneurial, more unique. We were in a Monday morning meeting, and someone said, like, what are we thinking about from an AI standpoint? Like, we use AI on the investment side constantly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What are some of the tools and tech that you guys are doing, because you can do it since you're your own brand, that I could only dream of because I have all these branded hotels?
Yeah, I mean, so we're constantly trying new things, constantly iterating. So it gives you flexibility, obviously, on the design, how you program a space, gives you flexibility operationally. But it's interesting your comment on AI and then the big brands. I mean, I watched a demo yesterday of this new Chat GPT agent that they've launched. There's a demo how someone types in, "Hey, I want to go to a wedding and my friend's wedding on this date and find me a tuxedo." And it blew my mind. I'm like, this is about to seriously, seriously disrupt the travel distribution landscape. And so these big behemoths, well, they're amazing companies. And listen, the C Corps are amazing companies. Wall Street loves them. It's a great business model. If I'm a venture capitalist betting on who's going to come out the other side of this AI revolution on top, it's probably not going to be Marriott or Hilton. All you have to do is look back to recent history, see what happened with the OTAs. I mean, the brands had their head in the sand and they've been playing catch up since then. So yeah, the AI thing is really interesting. Who knows where it's going, but it's going to be fascinating to see how it changes the independent hotel landscape. I think it's going to be revolutionary. I think, you're going to go through, you're going to jump on and book it. You're not going to go to Bonvoy anymore or Hilton Honors. You're going to jump on to Chat GPT and, let it kind of help navigate the travel decision-making process.
Yeah, I could care less about Bonvoy as a consumer. And maybe it's just me because I'm like in the business and I want to stay where I want to stay. But there's people are very particular about what they want, and it says something about them. And I think depending on the customer, they potentially may eventually be less likely to just book it because I'm using points and it's free versus, no, I'm staying here because I get an experience. If you're not getting an experience, then it's purely transactional, like a flight or
Mm-hmm.
you're going
Yeah.
to stay in this room. But if you're offering an experience that you can't get because you're staying at a hotel that's, you're utilizing points, I think that's going to start to turn people to just book where they want to book, and they're staying here because they know it.
I agree. And then, obviously social media plays a huge part in that.
Huge.
Now there's a lot of upstart brands that really have mastered Instagram and TikTok. And that's a great equalizer, especially for younger generations. I mean, my kids aren't going to, they're teenagers, but I don't foresee them in 4 or 5 years when they're booking, trips to go on to Bonvoy or Honors to book it. I mean, they're on TikTok, they're on Instagram, they're looking at reels. They're saying, "Oh, this guy I follow on Instagram, they stayed at this hotel. It looks really cool." That's going to drive the decision more than points and some of the legacy brands. In my humble opinion, I could be wrong. And like I said, Marriott and Hilton have a lot of really smart people working for them, and they've created these, incredibly successful enterprises. But AI is real, technology is real. It's going to be disruptive, I think, like nothing we've seen to date.
Yeah, we have an amazing social company that we use, and the content now that I don't even want to call them influencers because they're really like, artistic directors and video creators. The content that these people are creating that, we don't even pay for
Yeah. Yeah.
is incredible.
We've gone the same route as of last week. Yeah, you still want to use a traditional kind of marketing agency for, the basics, right? But yeah, content creation is something you need to bring in the experts to do.
This is always a question I like, but if you don't want to answer it, you don't have to answer it. When you look back over the past couple of years, what would you say is a huge mistake you've made on the business side that we could all learn from?
Yeah, I think, listen, we made a ton of mistakes. We're not immune from making mistakes. I touched on a few of them. Yeah, we made some mistakes in selecting GCs in the beginning, which cost us real dollars. We made some mistakes as far as not capitalizing the balance sheet enough as far as working capital goes to
Mm-hmm.
weather out the ramp. We've made mistakes like everyone else. I wouldn't say there's like one huge glaring mistake we made, but I will say we try to learn from the mistakes and try to learn from other people's mistakes in the business as well, which is more important actually.
Another thing you mentioned, which is probably why you haven't made the mistakes, is low leverage. People come to us all the time, whether it's for friendly advice or, they want us to participate in a deal and they're showing us an opportunity that's, way over leveraged. And I'm like, no, you cannot put more than 60% leverage in this deal. Like you cannot do it at 65%. It's just, you haven't survived these cycles. I'm telling you, it's going to be a problem. And they're like raising capital for debt, maybe because it's easier because it's like one source. But that's something that I've been seeing a lot lately where people, I think maybe that haven't been in the game as long as you have,
Yeah.
don't appreciate it.
Well, first of all, I'll gladly trade a few hundred basis points of IRR for lower leverage. We spend a lot of time on yield on cost is like the
Mm-hmm.
big metric we look at. But when I first started on the business and the first hotel I developed right out of business school, we developed a Sheraton in Chicago, on the north side of Chicago. Those were the days where you could get 80% leverage. We're literally 80% leverage. And then
Yep.
Lehman went under. And then, the GFC hit and the rest was history. But learned that at a pretty young age, which I'm glad I learned it when I was younger and not older. But I do think there was a correction after the GFC, and you can still find, debt funds to go out and do 65, 70%, but it's definitely not as prevalent as it was before. Now, a lot of people are layering on pref. I know you invest in pref, which is a
Yep.
great business model. We typically shy away from pref just because, to your point, you got to take it out. And if you hit the cycle at the wrong point in the cycle, you're in tough conversations with your preferred equity lender. So leverage is the key. It's we would, like I said, would rather take a little less risk but be able to sleep at night.
There's no mystery that debt funds willing to go to 80% also are principal investors. They have their own investment business. Like that's not like, banks are not going to 80%. They don't have investment, but these guys are happy to own your property. So
Yeah. It doesn't take a Harvard MBA to figure that one out.
no, it doesn't. I ask all the guests on the podcast the same closing question, and that's what is not in your portfolio, what is your favorite hotel? And you could give me a couple if there's a couple.
Yeah. No, I would say I knew this question was coming because I'm a fan of your podcast.
Thank you.
I stayed with my wife on her honeymoon at a hotel in Positano. It was right on the beach. maybe it was 2 stars, maybe 2.5 stars, but it was incredible location, great memories. We were right on the Mediterranean. I had everything we needed, and didn't have a pot to piss in back then, and so it was the only thing we could afford on our honeymoon in Positano. But it's called Hotel Pupetto. I don't
Wow.
know if it's still there, but it was great. It had this
I'm sure it's still there. It's owned by the same family, 100%.
yeah, exactly. It had this little little bar on the beach where you get like this bruschetta that was like the best thing I've ever tasted in my life. There was a guy named Luigi who made it. He lived on a boat. He rocked a
Oh,
speedo
wow.
around all day, making bruschetta and drinking wine. It was like perfect. So I would say Hotel Pupetto. I mean, listen, I've stayed at lots of nice hotels, but that one holds a special place. Just given the time of my life and just the ambiance and the fact I was in Positano, which is a pretty special place.
Can't go wrong. When I go to one of your hotels, I'm going to look for the bartender in a Speedo. I'm expecting to see that behind the front desk.
Perfect.
Thanks for coming on the podcast, man. This is amazing. And I'm excited to see the portfolio you build and where you take this thing. It's going to be big.
Yeah, no, thank you. Appreciate it. I love your podcast. You're kind of like the Joe Rogan of the hotel business. You have these long form podcasts, and that's a compliment.
Thank
I
you.
love it. So keep doing what you're doing. It's a great way to learn about the industry and get exposure ideas from really interesting, successful people. So keep it up, man.
Hey everyone, it's Jake here. Thanks again for joining me on this conversation. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Lastly, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at @JWurzak. I'll see you in the next episode.
Jake Wurzak is the founder and CEO of Dove Hill Capital Management. All opinions expressed by Jake and his guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Dove Hill Capital Management. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not reflect or represent real estate, financial, or investment advice.